Good morning. I'm Brian Curtis.
And I'm Doug Krisner. Here are the stories we're following today.
United Airlines says it has found loose bolts in multiple Boeing 737 MAX 9 jets during inspections. This comes in the wake of a door plug getting blown out of an Alaska Airlines plane over the weekend. As a result, U.S. aviation safety regulators grounded and ordered inspections on some 171 MAX 9 jets. Today, Boeing issued guidelines to airlines on how to conduct these inspections. It's an initial step that is required before the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration could approve a return to flight for the planes. Boeing shares, by the way, closed down 8% in New York. They are little changed in after hours, which is interesting because it came after we heard those comments from United Airlines. But that 8% drop in the stock is the biggest decline we've seen in Boeing since October of 2022.
Will the CEO of JetBlue Airways, Robin Hayes, he's going to be stepping down next month. We are told his decision came at the urging of his doctor, although no specific health issue is involved. Here's more from Bloomberg's Charlie Pellet.
The company says Hayes will be replaced on February 12th by Joanna Garrity, a nearly 20-year JetBlue veteran who is currently serving as president. The 57-year-old Hayes has been CEO since February of 2015, and JetBlue's shares have declined by about two-thirds since then. The transition comes at a critical time for JetBlue as it awaits a federal judge's ruling on whether its pending $3.8 billion takeover of Spirit Airlines violates antitrust laws and should be blocked. In New York, Charlie Pellet, Bloomberg Radio.
Shares closed at a record and up 6.4% in the latest session after the company unveiled 3 new desktop graphics chips. These extra components will let gamers, designers, and other computer makers and users get better use of AI in their personal machines. We heard earlier from Bloomberg's Ian King.
AI has been an enormous benefit for this company already. It's proved materially that this is real, that this is about actual sales and actual deployment. Again, NVIDIA comes out here and says, hey, don't forget about us, this AI PC that Intel, that AMD has been talking about. We can do this too, and actually we think we're better than they are. So again, that's likely to press the right kind of button with investors, and we're seeing that reaction.
Bloomberg's Ian King. Separately, NVIDIA said the capabilities of its new products will not trigger rules put in place by the U.S. government to limit the export of AI-related chips to China. And again, NVIDIA shares with a very good session, up 6.4%.
We go to China next, where the central bank is hinting at further monetary easing with a possible cut in banks' reserve ratios. The story from Bloomberg's Yvonne Mann in Hong Kong.
The PBOC may use assorted monetary policy tools to provide more support. The central bank's head of monetary policy, Zhou Lan, said these tools include money market operations, medium-term lending facilities, and reserve requirements. The comments come after the central bank already provided a massive amount of liquidity in recent weeks. Back in July, Zhou made similar comments in public before the central bank made a RRR cut in September. Much of this may already be priced into markets. Last month, economists polled by Bloomberg forecast a 25 basis point cut in the first quarter of this year. In Hong Kong, I'm Yvonne Mann, Bloomberg Radio.
Meantime, Chinese President Xi Jinping is pledging to deepen the country's crackdown on corruption. Bloomberg's Joanne Wong has that story from Hong Kong.
President Xi said he would increase punishment for people who offer bribes. CCTV says Xi urged tighter monitoring to prevent the spread of graft to new sectors. He highlighted finance, energy, infrastructure, pharmaceutical, and state-owned firms as the main areas of focus. Xi has repeatedly vowed zero tolerance on corruption since he took office in 2012. Just last year, China investigated a number of high-profile bankers. These include former Bank of China Chairman Liu Liangge and former China Development Bank Vice President Zhou Qingyu. In Hong Kong, I'm Joanne Wong, Bloomberg Radio.
Sony is planning to call off the $10 billion merger agreement of its Indian unit with Z Entertainment. We are told it's due to a standoff over leadership. Seems as though there were questions surrounding whether Z CEO Punit Goenka, who is also incidentally the founder's son, would lead this new merged entity. Back in 2021, an agreement was signed for Goenka to lead the new company. However, Sony no longer wants him to be in the role. Sony seems to be a little wary about a regulatory probe against him, and now Sony is working on sending a termination notice by January 20th.
It's time for World News. Donald Trump is looking to have one of his court cases thrown out. We get more on this from Bloomberg's Dan Schwartzman. Dan?
That's correct, Brian. In a filing today in Atlanta, Georgia, Trump has asked a judge to throw out the state's criminal case against him. The former president has been accused of leading a conspiracy to overturn the 2020 election. Now, Trump argues he should be immune from prosecution due to having been acquitted by the Senate after being impeached for the same conduct. Trump will also use the same argument on Tuesday during an appeals court hearing in Washington after a district judge struck down his immunity defense. President Biden speaking in Charleston, South Carolina today as he tries to make his case to black voters as to why they should support him like they did in 2020. The president's favorability amongst black voters fell to 61% in December. That's down 7% from October. Donald Trump holding steady at 25%. Biden was interrupted by pro-Palestinian protesters during his speech. He says he's working to get Israel out of Gaza.
I understand their passion, and I've been quietly working with the Israeli government to get them to reduce and significantly get out of Gaza. I'm using all that I can to do that.
As President Biden speaking in South Carolina. Secretary of State Antony Blinken continuing his fourth tour of the Middle East since Hamas's October 7th attack on Israel with a meeting with Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Blinken is attempting to calm the region while also urging Israel to do more to protect civilians in Gaza. The secretary also took the time to warn the Iranian-backed Houthi militants that there will be consequences for attacking commercial ships in the Red Sea. Hezbollah says that a senior commander, Wissam Tawil, was killed in an Israeli airstrike on a car in southern Lebanon. The terror organization and Israel have been trading fire daily since Hamas's attack on Israel. Senior Israeli officials have warned that they are prepared to militarily move Hezbollah from the northern border if a diplomatic solution is not achieved, with time for a resolution running out. The first U.S. moon landing in 50 years seemingly is doomed, as a Pittsburgh-based Astrobotic Technology says the spacecraft developed a, quote, critical fuel leak hours after takeoff. The company says they had managed to point the lander toward the sun to allow for the solar panel to collect enough sunlight to charge its battery while determining the next steps. Astrobotic is aiming to be the first private company to land on the moon, with NASA having given them and a Houston-based company millions of dollars to build and fly lunar landers. The second company is scheduled to make an attempt on the moon next month. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Dan Schwartzman, and this is Bloomberg.
I'm Brian Curtis in Hong Kong. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Asia. Paul Allen joins us now from Sydney, and our guest is George Ferguson, Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Aerospace and Airlines Analyst, to look closer at this Boeing story and all the latest. So, George, this latest disclosure by United Airlines would seem to be quite troubling, as it involves multiple jets being affected by this, although the testing apparently was confined to the MAX-9 jets. And we'll get into maybe later whether or not this could spread. But in the short term, could this set back hopes now that the FAA might clear these planes anytime soon?
First, thanks for having me on. I just think that I think given the problems with the Alaska Air flight, I think the FAA would have wanted inspection of all the airplanes in the fleet anyways. And so my sense is it doesn't necessarily slow things down or change the inspection program. I do think that, this plug is typically used on the longer version of the 737. So I think that the risk that it spreads to the rest of the MAX fleet is lower. There's not even a plug in the smaller portion of the airplane, as near as we can tell. And so I think that it probably does stay limited to the -9.
Yeah, another small development that we heard of that is kind of curious. The cockpit flight recorder got overridden. First off, since when was that a thing? And secondly, what are the implications?
Yeah, I'd heard this as well. And so, it's like one of those hard drives that probably overwrites itself every so many hours. And my guess is, though, that wasn't a lot to learn necessarily from the cockpit, right? The pilots got the airplane back intact, thankfully, to the airport. I'm sure there's a bunch of stress in the cockpit. But I really think that the majority of what we're going to learn about this flight is going to be back at the door plug and the piece they found on the ground.
It seems like what we've learned so far is that this is more of a manufacturing issue rather than a design issue. Is that correct? And is that somewhat less troubling then to clean up the manufacturing side rather than design?
I think it is less troubling. I think it would be a silver lining for Boeing. You hate to have this happen under any circumstances, but when you look at the way the plug, you look at the shots later on, and you see where the plug was in the airplane and how clean the plug seemed to have left the airplane. It does seem to indicate that either fasteners failed or someone didn't apply the fasteners correctly. And I think the United news kind of confirms that maybe somebody on the manufacturing line didn't understand the right procedure for applying this plug.
Are we potentially seeing a bit of a blame game starting to emerge here as well as to whether it's Boeing's processes at fault, perhaps Spirit that makes the fuselage, or even this other company we're now hearing about, AAR, which had installed Wi-Fi during a maintenance period?
Yeah, so the AAR is sort of a late-breaking story, and I guess I'd have to hear that they had done the dome on both Alaska and United and a bunch of airplanes. I think we'd have to find sort of more evidence that would tie them together. I would think that there's always a potential for blame game here, but at the end of the day, Boeing manufactures the airplane and warrants it to be airworthy as it leaves their factory. And so I think as much as they might have a supplier problem with Spirit not doing the work right, it's their job to make sure the airplane leaves the factory ready to go. And so I think that you can't get away with too much of that. And I would just, I sort of follow that up a bit with Boeing can't make the 737, any version of it, without Spirit Aerosystems. And so as much as they may want to say, hey, look, our supplier did this, it's not our fault, they can't, they need Spirit to survive, and they need Spirit to thrive. And so again, they can only get away with so much of that. They really need to get down there if the problem's at Spirit and help Spirit fix the problem, because that's the way forward for both Spirit and for Boeing.
Just asking this from a pure layman's standpoint, getting back to the question of these plugs, these areas of the plane, which might have a door, but in this case had a plug block in there, and that's what blew off and caused this. If it ultimately is a manufacturing issue, wouldn't this kind of raise questions about many other planes, no matter what? Because a lot of these manufacturing processes, these people are working on multiple types of planes.
Yeah. So Spirit though has a heavy amount of work on the 737. So I think that if it's a problem at Spirit, does it mean that it's a problem on a lot of different narrow bodies? Not necessarily. Plugs are used on a lot of different airplanes and have been used effectively for many, many, many years, right? And I think as well, if there's a problem with a plug, a significant enough problem that it's not going to be able to maintain pressure, you're going to know it, I think, pretty soon when you get into service. And this particular airplane had been in service less than 3 months. So I don't think it's something that we all need to be overly concerned about. But again, I think on the Dash 9, you do, and we need to make an inspection on everything in the fleet to feel safe.
Can you give us a bit of a sense of the task ahead now for Boeing in terms of restoring trust, restoring its reputation? Is there anything comparable in your experience?
No, I think these last 4 or 5 years at Boeing have been, I would say, perhaps unprecedented. And starting from the MCAS debacle with the crashes and getting to here, I think we can see how this occurred. Right, the airplane was grounded prior to the pandemic. I think that led to stress on the workforce. People may decide to leave. There were reductions in workforce. Then you hit a pandemic where travel goes to almost zero. And you can understand why other people might say that would be their time to leave the business. So I think the way forward is really about training the workforce extremely well, and they may have to overdo that here.
Yeah. All right, George, thank you. Very good information. George Ferguson, Bloomberg Intelligence, Senior Aerospace and Airlines Analyst. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Asia, your morning brief on the stories making news from Hong Kong to Singapore and Wall Street.
Look for us on your podcast feed every day on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcast.
You can also listen live each day on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 106.1 in Boston, and Bloomberg 960 in San Francisco.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, Sirius XM Channel 119, the iHeartRadio app, and on Bloomberg.com. I'm Brian Curtis.
I'm Doug Krisner. Join us again tomorrow for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Asia.